Hey everybody, all right, I am a little early, it looks like, 12 minutes early. Anyways, how's everybody doing? I hope you guys have had a great week so far. Usually we do these things on Tuesdays, but my wife and I have had some family issues in the past week or so, actually in the past 2 weeks or so. Um, if you're listening to this and you're a Christian, my grandma passed away last week, and so I would appreciate prayers for that. But that's what we've been dealing with lately, and so we have not had a chance to get on here and discuss some very, very important issues. And then today, I saw that Dr. Richard Carrier actually published an article in response to some things I wrote about a month or two ago. And so I thought that would provide an excellent opportunity for me to jump on here and produce another episode of the Covenant Review. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today is Dr. Richard Carrier's article about three of my articles, which was in response to his mischaracterization of Dr. Alvin Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism. And so I argued in my three-part series that Carrier misrepresented Plantinga in his argument against naturalism, against evolutionary naturalism. And so what I wanted to do here is review the article that he just published, which is about those three blog articles and how Plantinga's argument is still wrong and how Carrier's representation of it is still right, and so on and so forth. So the problem, let me just preface before I get into the actual content here. The problem with Richard Carrier, unfortunately, is the fact that it seems like he has a problem accurately representing the side that he's critiquing. And so he doesn't seem to be able to do that. He doesn't seem to be able to do that at least well, in any sense of the term, whenever he writes anything that's in critique of something. Okay. And so he's done this with me. He's done this with Dr. Richard Carrier, or Dr. Richard Carrier. Well, yeah, maybe he does do that to himself. Actually, I've seen where he misrepresents himself at times. But he's done that to Dr. Plantinga. He's done that to Tim Keller as well in his recent series on Tim Keller's book. But those are different issues. I want to focus specifically on his mischaracterization of Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism. And so we're just going to jump in here. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. I just want to show why a few of the claims that he made in his article are demonstrably false and are hasty. Maybe he just has, a trigger to pull, and he doesn't really care about where the gun is aimed. And so we're here to kind of evaluate that. And as Christians and those who are unbelievers out there, who, anybody who might be watching this needs to recognize that we need to hold truth in a high regard. And I would encourage all of you to get your information from somewhere else, basically. Or at least compare what Carrier puts out with somebody else who is also who is reliable, somebody who seems to have a cooler head on their shoulders, maybe somebody who doesn't have so much of an axe to grind. So without further ado, here's the article. Here's the article called "Why Plantinga's Tiger is Pseudoscience," which is actually in response to three blog articles that I wrote a couple of months ago. And he promised a response to these. And here it is. He's made good on that promise. So the paragraph that I started with says this. It says, Summer incorrectly says, Carrier seems to think that since Plantinga has no expertise in evolutionary science, then he's not qualified to speak on the subject. And Carrier says, well, that's false, because I said he is not qualified to invent new theories in that field and declare them to be true. The problem here is that Carrier actually does say something in reference to in kind of the same vein of saying, well, Plantinga is not in this field, therefore Plantinga can't really speak on these issues. And he doesn't say that explicitly per se, but this actually happened in his one of his last articles on the Tim Keller series. And he says this, if I could pull it up real quick here. I thought I did it earlier. He actually says that, well, Plantinga is not, he says something to the effect of, well, Plantinga is not in this field, and then he follows that up with something else. But basically, what it looks like he's saying is, well, Plantinga doesn't do any work in this field. He's not a scientist. He's not a biologist, and so he can't speak on it. And what he says, and this is, remember, this is in response to Tim Keller's book. He says Keller relies a lot on Alvin Plantinga for his illogical arguments on this, but Plantinga has no expertise in evolutionary science. Okay, so that's where he starts. All right, and so I did say that Carrier seems to think that since Plantinga has no expertise in evolutionary science, then he's not qualified to speak on the subject. Plantinga disputes what I said there, and he says, no, that's actually wrong. He says, I said he is not qualified to invent new theories in that field and then declare them to be true. But nowhere is Plantinga doing that, and I'll get to that. But Plantinga is not inventing a new theory of evolutionary cognition. As a matter of fact, he is actually using authors in the past that have written on this who were in that field specifically. And so what Carrier goes on to say is, he says he is, or ought to be, fully qualified, that is Plantinga, to consult the actual science there is and correctly represent it and use its demonstrated true premises in his arguments. My criticism, he says, of Plantinga is that he never does that. He never references any actual scientific fact or literature in cognition or cognitive evolution. Instead, he makes a bunch of Kin-Ham, and pardon my language, but I'm just going to be faithful in quoting him. Instead, he makes a bunch of Kin-Ham bullshit up and uses that as true premises in his argument. That's pseudoscience, end quote. What I have listed out actually is four different authors, and this is just within a few pages of Plantinga's book, which is titled Warrant and Proper Function, and he uses many different authors that speak on this in scientific journals or books that they've written. And so there's just a few of them within just a few pages of what I'm reading in Plantinga. He cites Larry Wright in the Philosophical Review, and this is printed for Cambridge and is published by MIT Press. He cites Richard Dawkins in The Blind Watchmaker. He cites John Pollock in reference to functional generalizations in his article How to Build a Person, and this was later critiqued by Kenneth Conondike. He cites Ruth Millikan, who published I believe it's a book, or maybe it's an article called Language, Thought, and Other Biological Categories. Oh, that's an article, which was printed by MIT Press at Cambridge. And so there's other people that Plantinga references in order to build off what they have written in the past. And so when Carrier basically says, well, he never consults actual science, and he never correctly cites anyone, he never lists any scientific facts, he never cites any scientific literature, that's just demonstrably false. I mean, you can read through Warrant and warranted Christian belief. You can read through warrant and proper function. You can read through where the his other book, the most recent book that just came out. I can't remember the title right now. But it's like where the problem lies, or where the issue actually lies. Here, I'll look it up for you. He does this. I mean, he's not a sloppy writer. He's actually writing things and building upon what has been discussed in the past. He's not just coming up with some fad theory on evolutionary cognition. It's called Where the Conflict Really Lies. I'm sure most of you knew that. For some reason, I didn't right now. One of the other paragraphs that I decided to pick out and kind of critique is he says this. He says right off the bat, Summers says the first premise of Plantinga's actual argument is, and then he quotes what I summarized in my blog article. I said the probability that our cognitive faculties are reliable given naturalistic evolution is low. Okay, that's just a part of what I actually wrote. And so this is just unbelievable that he would do this, because that's not all I wrote in that particular article. And so he's already arguing a straw man, because this is not how you critique an article, ladies and gentlemen. You don't just pick a sentence, rip it out of its context, and then critique it on that basis. And that's what he's doing right here. And so what I actually wrote in summary is the probability that our cognitive faculties are reliable given naturalistic evolution is low. That's actually a conditional probability issue. Okay, and then I said right after that on the same bullet point, if evolution and naturalism were true together, then our cognitive faculties would probably not be reliable. Okay. And I can actually cite where I got this from. It was page 231 in Warrant and Proper Function. Okay, so if you look it up on Amazon, it's the blue book that Alvin Plantinga wrote, or bluish gray or whatever. It's called Warrant and Proper Function. Page 231 is where I got that from. And if Carrier did any reading on this, then he would understand. What's amazing about this is that Carrier actually goes on to link an article from Plantinga, which is actually just a copy and paste of what's in Warrant and Proper Function, and proves my point in that link, and thinks that he is showing how devastatingly wrong I am. It's just not the way to critique anyone's work. I mean, most of what I said in those 3 blog articles are not in Carrier's response article. I mean, he's showing a lot of partiality in not representing what I actually said. But this is normal, guys. This is something that Carrier does all the time. I mean, you can read the Tim Keller articles, and if you read anything of Tim Keller, I've not read all of what he wrote, but when he goes through and he piecemeals some sort of point together on the basis of a sentence taken from this chapter of the book, and a sentence taken from another chapter of the book, and a sentence taken from a different chapter of the book, you can invent anything you want if you do that. And that's what Carrier does. He builds this elaborate straw man, and then he critiques it on the basis, critiques someone else's work on the basis of something he actually invented. He doesn't properly represent the other side, and that is the central issue here. The next paragraph that I chose out of the mini, is this. Carrier says, our evolved faculties are in fact very poor. So poor that they were indeed wholly incapable of discovering things like that evolution is true. Okay. Already, we're conflating categories, or we're leaving categories out. There's category errors here. Okay, and then he goes on and he says, but they were not so poor as to be totally unreliable, and in fact were good enough to make it possible that, given enough time to explore and experiment, we could invent software patches, quotes, that would fix the things wrong with them. What's interesting here is that Plantinga, in order to say this, has to presuppose that something was wrong with our cognitive faculties in the first place, and those who came before us many thousands of years ago would have had to know or assume that something was wrong with our cognitive faculties in order to fix what's wrong with them. What Plantinga is saying is that there's no good reason, given naturalistic evolution, to think that there's a high probability that we would be right in saying that our cognitive faculties are unreliable. And so when Carrier goes off and says, well, our evolved faculties are in fact very poor, he's already presupposing a standard that Plantinga's EAAN, or Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism, has already taken into account. And so Carrier is kind of already arguing on the basis of something Plantinga has already addressed. And so do you see what he's doing, though? I mean, he's saying that people thousands of years ago would have had to identify issues with our cognitive faculties. But the problem here is that if our cognitive faculties are indeed unreliable, how would have they been able to verify or know or come to a true belief or true justified belief, or actually a warranted belief in Plantinga's language, that our cognitive faculties were indeed unreliable so as to want to fix them? That is just so foreign to anything in anthropological history. What Carrier is basically saying here is that the motive of building tools and using tools to build greater things, I mean, tools are one of the first signs that anthropologists have found of human development. And so he's basically saying that tools were made in order to fix our lapses in cognitive function. But that just totally goes against both human experience and historical survey. Because historical survey would say that people actually developed things in order to improve life, not their cognitive function, but to improve life or to discover new things, to explore the world around them, to do a very basic form of science. There's tools for agricultural purposes, for survival. Okay, there's tools made for discovery. There's tools invented and made in order that we can better our lives. Those are the things that are found. Hammers, shovels, things that could be made to either better our life or to discover other ways of doing things. And that's what it boils down to in the most basic of forms. It's not like an ancient human being was standing there and thought that, wow, our cognitive faculties are actually pretty crappy. I need to make up for this with technology. No group of people thought that. Now, is it true that there are lapses in our cognitive functions? Of course. Nobody's denying that. Nobody's saying that our cognitive faculties are just beyond reliability, or beyond error, I should say. But what we are saying, and what Plantinga is saying, is that our cognitive faculties, with respect to the truth, if you give the truth or grant the truth of evolutionary naturalism, our cognitive faculties should not be seen as probabilistically reliable. Okay, so when he says that we have to look at this in hindsight and say, well, they would fix the things wrong with our cognitive faculties with technology. So there's this distinction that Carrier makes between biology and technology, and elsewhere in his writing. You have to presuppose the reliability of your cognitive function in order to say that there was a problem. And Carrier, or sorry, not Carrier, but Plantinga already assumes that in his argument and addresses it, as a matter of fact, with the use of defeaters. And amazingly, Carrier doesn't even talk about that. So if you accept the first premise of Plantinga's argument, this is what he says, then you've encountered a defeater for evolutionary naturalism. Carrier never talks about that when he characterizes, or when he tries to characterize, Plantinga's argument. The next paragraph, he says, and to get to all that, Plantinga argues for a model of cognitive evolution. He never does this. He never presents an argument for a model of cognitive evolution. I don't know where he's getting that. In the article that he cited, he's not arguing for, I mean, if we're being precise with our language, he's not arguing for a model of cognitive evolution. And with his citations in his book, Warrant and Proper Function and Warranted Christian Belief, he is not making up a model for cognitive evolution. He's not arguing for a model of cognitive evolution. He is arguing distinctly on the basis of what others have said, like Richard Dawkins and Ruth Millikan and Larry Wright and all of these guys, John Pollock and these guys that have written something on it before. The MIT academic journal that he's pulling some of this out of, I would say, is sufficient for his research as a philosopher. And so he's not arguing, first of all, for a model of cognitive evolution. Okay, that's not what Plantinga is arguing for. And with respect to the evolutionary argument against naturalism, that's especially not what he's arguing for. And you can look at it. You can look at it in the argument article, or the article that Carrier links himself in his article. You can read it on page 231, starting in page 231 of Warrant and Proper Function. Okay, so I'm citing examples here that you yourself can go and research these things, and I encourage you to do so, because don't take Carrier's word for it. He's just blasting out his frustrations on the blogosphere. The next paragraph, it says, it's important to emphasize the connection between both of those points. Not only is the fact that our faculties display again, foul language warning, not only is it the fact that our faculties display a shit design from top to bottom evidence against their having been in any way intelligently designed, and clear evidence that they were produced by blind natural selection instead, but the fact that we ourselves had to intellectually invent fixes to get them to work well enough to know advanced things like physics and philosophy. I'm trying here to understand what he's saying. Elsewhere in his writing, he actually comes up with this grand theory that we invented logic and thus invented mathematics as well. And he says some other things, philosophy and science. I'm not going to deny that we haven't developed interpretive apparatuses for those things, but we have not invented numerical realities. Okay, that is just that would even militate against the fact that we can observe distinctions within creation or within existence. Dr. Carrier, if I could just speak to you one-on-one for a minute, you would have to say that not only have we invented math, but we've also invented distinctions within the world around us. Because what math does and what logic does is recognize the distinctions within in the created order, within the existing order. And so to say that we invented mathematics or the laws of logic is just folly. I mean, that's ridiculous. Invented characters which represent mathematical and precise logical realities, but we did not invent the concepts themselves. We didn't. It's just unheard of. It's ridiculous. Where was I going with that? Okay, so he says we've invented fixes in order to get these things to work well. When he says we've invented fixes, he's obviously talking about abstract realities such as laws of logic. Okay, I would actually refer anyone who's listening to an article written by James Anderson and Greg Welty. You can find it on academia.edu. Okay, which actually argues for the existence of God by way of the laws of logic. It's a very good article. Anyways, check that out on your own time. That's Greg Welty and James N. Anderson on academia.edu. See, I'm citing academic articles. So anyways, when he says that we've invented fixes to get our cognitive faculties to work well, first of all, we would have had to identify at some point in time in the past, we would have had to identify a distinction before we invented these fixes. We would have had to identify a distinction, namely that that our present condition as human beings, as sentient human beings, is insufficient to observe that which is around us. And then we would have had to get to work on inventing things like the laws of logic, for instance. So that's a problem, because identifying distinctions implicitly or explicitly assumes some sort of logical, rational process that a person has to go through. Nextly, in order to say that the laws of logic are human conventions, in order to say that the laws of logic have been invented by human beings, and I think this would go for math as well, you have to be able to show a different logical apparatus or context from which you could stand in order to say that the present system of logic has been invented, or that it is not the only system of logic out there. So you would have to use different laws of logic, okay? And when I say the laws of logic, I mean like literally the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity, and the law of excluded middle. You would have to show that there are different laws of logic in order to say that those laws of logic are either invented human conventions or are not inherent in creation in some way, shape, or form. But Carrier, what he does is he uses the existing laws of logic in order to go back and say, we invented these laws of logic. So he's in a vicious circle. Next paragraph, he says, Summer incorrectly says, Carrier seems to think that since Plantinga has no expertise in evolutionary science, then he's not qualified to speak on the subject. And I apologize because this paragraph is actually in here twice in my notes. But what he said is again, actually, let's just go ahead and trash that because I made a mistake there. So don't even pay attention to that paragraph because it's already been talked about. So the real next paragraph is Summer incorrectly says, he says that multiple times, Summer incorrectly says Plantinga is not trying to develop a model for evolutionary anthropological cognition or characterize how natural selection developed the biological neurological synapses in the human brain. Carrier says false. Plantinga makes the assertion, okay, the assertion, not the argument, okay. Plantinga makes the assertion that a particular model of cognitive evolution, the selection of his belief-desire pairs, like see tiger run, by the way, see tiger run is not a belief-desire pair, so don't let him mislead you there. is the most probable way cognitive evolution works. First of all, Plantinga never evaluates the most probable way cognitive evolution works. If anything, he presupposes a model, and he gets that model from other authors that he cites in his work, such as Warrant and Proper Function, which I have cited already. And he says, is the most probable way cognitive evolution works, that such a mechanism could not produce our ability to achieve scientific and philosophical knowledge. Again, that's not the argument, because the argument is probabilistically bound. The argument is not saying that we cannot achieve scientific and philosophical knowledge on the basis of naturalistic evolution. It's saying that the probability that our cognitive faculties are reliable so as to achieve these things is low. So Plantinga is arguing for the low probability of functioning cognitive faculties, of properly functioning cognitive faculties, okay? Let's just get that off our chests here, because Carrier time and time again wants to attack this straw man. But in fact, this is not what Plantinga is arguing for or against. And so I wrote here, I said, this is not Plantinga's argument at all. In fact, Carrier fails at locating Plantinga's evaluation of probabilities correctly. Plantinga is not examining the most probable way evolutionary cognition works, as Carrier seems to think. Rather, Plantinga is evaluating the probability that, given the truth of N and E, or naturalism and evolution taken together, or naturalistic evolution, our cognitive faculties function properly. So he's evaluating the probability that our cognitive faculties function properly, given N and E. Okay, that probability, Plantinga argues, is extremely low. And I point out here that see tiger run is not an example of belief-desire combinations. Okay, that's a behavior resulting from a particular belief-desire combination. And Plantinga says this. He says, beliefs do indeed cause behavior, but only by virtue of their electrochemical properties, according to naturalistic evolution, not by virtue of their content. And this is key in Plantinga's argument. This possibility is said to be the received opinion by Rob Cummins, another person he cites. And he cites that from Meaning and Mental Representation. So if you accept materialism, it's hard to see any alternative to the fact that our beliefs, really, according to N and E, do not have content. They don't cause behavior with respect to the content of the beliefs. So it's okay to say beliefs do indeed cause behavior, but only by virtue of their electrochemical properties, which is consistent according to naturalism or materialism. Next paragraph, he says, Summer incorrectly says, I'm not entirely sure where Carrier gets this from. Perhaps a dream, I snarked. And he says, false, unless Summer thinks this paper by Alvin Plantinga is a dream. And he links the paper that I'm talking about there, which actually proves my point, not Carrier's point. If you want to go back and look at it, it's linked in Carrier's article. And it starts on page 231. Well, actually just slightly before that, in Warrant and Proper Function. Not actually doing their research and not actually reading what their own apologists have written. Not an uncommon tactic among Christian apologists like Summer. Okay. Now, the interesting part about this paragraph is that he doesn't include any of the context of what I said there. Because what I said, I'm not entirely sure where Carrier gets this from. Well, what's this? The reader should ask, what is this? What am I referring to here? Because there's no pretext really to this. He's just going through willy-nilly and trying to split hairs. But this is what Carrier said in his previous article, and this is what I'm responding to. Carrier said he thinks, for instance, that it would be more likely for evolution to program us with a zillion random commands, like always run from tigers, than a single general intelligence algorithm that would be able to figure out what things kill us, instead of having to have been generically programmed to know that in advance. And then I said, this is an unfortunate caricature in my response article. I said, first, I'm not entirely sure where Carrier gets this from. Perhaps a dream? Dr. Plantinga did a 1.5-hour talk at the Veritas Forum, okay? And I linked that in my article. Dr. Plantinga did a 1.5-hour talk at the Veritas Forum where he states his argument. You can find it here, and it's linked. In his talk, Plantinga describes multiple theses on evolution, okay? And he does, okay? In the Veritas Forum lecture, he does discuss different theses on evolution. And so what Carrier says is it does not comport with the actual data. It does not comport with what Plantinga actually says in his talk and in his books. So when Carrier says he thinks, for instance, that it would be more likely for evolution to program us with a zillion random commands, like always run from tigers, he's mischaracterizing the argument, actually. He's picking something other than the argument to characterize and then critique. What Plantinga actually does is he gives examples of why belief-desire combinations are not always aimed at the truth, and so they produce behavior which is not always resulting from truth. Okay, and he's not saying that evolution couldn't have done what it has done because of belief-desire pairs. That's not the argument at all. And I'll just refer you back to the article of the synopsis of his book, Warrant and Proper Function. It's kind of a synopsis. It's just an excerpt from. That's what I was looking for. It's an excerpt from Warrant and Proper Function. And so those are quite a few examples that I pulled from this one article. And I'm not, he's kind of long-winded. He quotes at length. He makes really long-winded, long sentences. I'm not just going to sit here and go through this entire article, but hopefully this can show you that, generally speaking, he's unreliable as someone who is supposed to be a champion of truth and the desire to tell the truth and the desire to reason with others about his position. I think he fails at that, especially in this article here. Just these few examples that I pointed out. He's either outright lied, or he's totally misunderstood and hasn't done his homework, and thus shouldn't be writing in the first place. And no one should believe what he's writing in the first place if he's just ignorant and not doing what he's supposed to be doing as a scholar. And that's all I'm going to say on that. I might write something on this, but really I think this really suffices to point out the fact that my critique originally in those 3 blog posts was that Richard Carrier is a champion not of truth, but of misrepresenting other people so that he can look intellectually superior to them. And here he has done the very same thing in an article defending himself and critiquing me on the basis of those 3 blog posts that I wrote. He's doing the same thing. He's like habitual. He just cannot represent the other side accurately, and this is demonstrable. He contradicts himself. He doesn't only contradict those he writes about, but he contradicts himself as well. So anybody watching this, I'd encourage you to get a different poster boy. That, or believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ, because it is in him that all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge are hidden. I'm telling you, sin is manifested in irrationality. And so our rebellion against God is manifested in our irrationality. And when someone cannot be rational, it is a sign that they need to find a different position. And I suggest to you that the Christian position is the only one that provides that type of rationality. Consistency is what Christianity provides. This is what Christ provides. That's all I got to say about that. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was enlightening. And I hope that you will catch the next episode of the Covenant of Review. The Covenant of Review. I've been talking about the Covenant of Redemption a lot. Maybe we'll talk about that at some point. But the Covenant Review next week, hopefully on Tuesday, like we've been doing them. But anyways, God bless you all.